This segment on the Morgenthau Plan deals with its economic consequences. The destruction of the German economy and its conversion into a pastoral state had foreseeable consequences. The proposed benefits were the inability of such a state to become a military threat and a guarantee of English prosperity through the elimination of a competitor. It is impossible to believe that the economic geniuses in the Treasury did not foresee the disastrous consequences of this plan. Yet historian Warren Kimball asserted, quote, Morgenthau and those who supported his plan for the pastoralization of Germany could not have predicted the political and economic ramifications of what they proposed, unquote. Yet the consequences were clear to those who opposed the plan. Secretary of War Stimson pointed out the economic consequences in September 1944. Quote, Germany is an important producer of certain raw materials, namely coal and bauxite, for Europe as a whole, not to speak of the vast amount of industrial goods which Germany normally exports. Economist Vladimir Petrov commented, by forbidding the American army to maintain price, wage, and market controls, it literally decreed, as a State Department official put it, economic chaos. In this way, the Treasury view that the extreme disruption of the German economy was not in conflict with Allied interests and became official U.S. policy. Predictably, the economic policies followed in post-war Germany led to economic collapse. They not only led to the collapse of the German economy, but a general collapse of the entire European economy. American taxpayers were paying dearly for this economic catastrophe. In 1947, Herbert Hoover recorded, at the present time, the American taxpayers and British taxpayers are contributing nearly $600 million a year to prevent starvation of the Germans in the American and British zones alone. On September 5th, 1946, the New York Herald Tribune reported, the best way for the German people to be driven into the arms of the Soviet Union was for the United States to stand forth as the champion of indiscriminate and harsh misery in Germany. The French general Alphonse Juin told General Patton, it is indeed unfortunate, my general, that the English and Americans have destroyed in Europe the only sound country, and I do not mean France. Therefore, the road is now open for the advent of Russian communism. Excuse me. Avril Harriman commented on the impact of the economic situation in the rest of Europe. I don't think there is any doubt that, with the strong communist parties both in Italy and France, Stalin would have extended his dominance to the Atlantic if we had not acted to frustrate it. In all probability, the communist leaders in those countries had reported to Moscow that they would take over, and I think they would have succeeded if we had not helped Western Europe to recover. Senator Shipstead of Minnesota saw the results of U.S. policy and stated, starvation and famine exist not only in Germany and Central Europe, but also throughout the occupied countries such as Poland and the Balkan areas. It was planned that way. The economic chaos planned by Harry Dexter White was working perfectly, and the Soviets were preparing to take advantage of it. Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov declared in his speech to the Council of Foreign Ministers in Paris on July 10, 1946, in it he asserted it would be incorrect to adopt the course of Germany's annihilation as a state or that of its agrarianization, including the annihilation of its main industrial centers. Secretary of State Burns recorded, quote, I realized at once the strength of this appeal. It was clearly calculated to play on the widespread German fear of the so-called Morgenthau Plan, which had been widely discussed in the American press. Another economic policy originated in the Treasury and engineered by Harry Dexter White was providing the Soviets with a duplicate set of plates to produce occupation currency. R. Bruce Craig maintained that neither White nor anyone else in a position of authority in the Treasury or the State Department could have anticipated the serious economic repercussions that developed in the ensuing months as a result of the War Department's failure to address occupation currency redemption policies and practices. Ben Steil called White's trust in the Russians as, quote, inexcusably naive at best. White's defenders consistently claim that this economic genius had no idea of how his policies would pan out. The three Western allies put into circulation a total of about 10.5 billion occupation marks. The Soviets issued, on a very conservative basis, 78 billion. Robert Hager of the United States United Press estimated this oblique raid on the Treasury amounted to more than $300 million before the Army called a halt. Edwin Hartrich, the author of The Fourth and Richest Reich, complained, the Russian soldiers were in the black market for anything of value they could carry away with them to the Soviet Union. A cheap U.S. PX wristwatch costing $15 to $20 would sell for as high as 5,000 Russian-printed occupation marks, which in turn could be redeemed by the American seller for $500 postal money order. Russians paid the equivalent of U.S. $1,000 for a Mickey Mouse watch. The economic conditions created an atmosphere that was conducive to massive corruption. The chief U.S. prosecutor, a Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson, demanded that the military property officer acquire 2 grand pianos for him. Historian Peterson remarked that no record was kept of where the pianos were obtained or how much were paid for them. Colonel Stanley Andrews commented on a group of U.S. congressmen who came to Germany for an inspection. They were given post-exchange cards and allowed to buy anything they wanted at the local post exchange. They would load up their suitcase with cigarettes, and on at least one occasion, a very prominent congressman asked me, "Tell me where the black market is," and he headed straight for it. The issuance of a new currency was postponed due to the expected opposition of the Soviets. This new currency was not issued until June 1948. The Soviet response was to impose a blockade on the city of Berlin the next day and to issue their own reformed currency. The initial tensions with the Soviets failed to put an end to the Morgenthau's policies. 10 months into the blockade, the London Times reported that the Borbeck-Krupps armament works was in the process of being shipped to the Soviet Union. The policy of industrial dismantlement did not end until April 1951. Europe was dependent on fuel produced in the Ruhr. In May 1945, a group of U.S. and British economic experts, the Potter-Hindley Commission, released a study of European coal requirements and concluded, unless drastic steps are taken, there will occur in the Northwest Europe and the Mediterranean next winter a coal famine of such severity as to destroy all semblance of law and order, and thus delay any chance of reasonable stability. General Clay also recognized that Morgenthau's policies would ultimately reduce the amount of coal available for export. He remarked, of course, any increase would deprive the German economy of the ability to meet many of its chief needs and would retard any lasting increase in coal production. The average daily output per miner in 1938 was 1.5 tons, but in 1946 and 1947, the average output was 0.86 tons and 0.88 tons per day, respectively. Historian Nicholas Balabkins attributed the low productivity to the reduced rations. The low food allotments were the principal reason for an almost precipitous decline in labor productivity. Field Marshal Montgomery commented, "If we wanted more coal, we'd have to feed the miners properly." In 1946, Max Forrester, the chief American military government's coal and mining division, was asked, what did the Germans do to get efficient production from forced labor that we're not able to do with the Germans working the mines? Forrester remarked, "They fed their help and they fed them well." White's economic policies were working perfectly. By 1947, France and Italy were on the verge of electing communist governments.